Hi, and welcome to the 58th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the original creator of TiddlyWiki, and I'm joined today from left to right on my screen, Branimir. Would you like to say hi, where you're from, and your involvement in TiddlyWiki?
Hi, my name is Branimir, and I am from Sofia, Bulgaria. I have been using TiddlyWiki Classic for 3 years now as a user, and I'm currently switching to the new version, TiddlyWiki 5.
Indeed, and made lots of useful contributions already. Thank you, Branimir. Mark, hi. Would you like to say hello and where you're from and your involvement in TiddlyWiki?
Yeah, I'm Mark. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I've been playing around with TiddlyWiki for the last 6 months or so. Just trying to find out how the internals work and things.
Great. Well, good to see you. Mark, I must ask you, that bridge, is that bridge in Detroit?
No, I'm not sure where that comes from.
Okay. Cool bridge, anyway. And Leo, I'm sorry, Slonik, I should say, perhaps.
Well,
would you like to say hello?
Jeremy, sorry for dropping out for some time. So my name is Leo. I'm joining on the nickname of Slonik. Feel free to call me either way. So I'm residing in New York. I am an active TiddlyWiki Classic user. And I am actually playing with TiddlyWiki 5 and hope that after the official release I probably will just convert everything I have to TiddlyWiki 5, and I'm excited. It looks like a very good note-taking application.
Brilliant, Leo. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And finally, Ton, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ton Gerner from the Netherlands, long-time user of TiddlyWiki, and author of a few guides about customization TiddlyWiki 5.
Indeed, indeed, which have been incredibly popular with the community. Well, thank you all very much for joining me. In fact, I've been mostly away since the Hangout last week, so there's very little new developments on my side. But we did release 5.0.15 last Wednesday, so yeah, I guess that was the day after the last Hangout. But we'll kick off today with the Q&A app, where we've got a question from Ton, and as usual, anybody else who's got questions, feel free to add them using the Q&A app, or in a minute or two, when I ask for any further questions, just pipe up at that point. I can see that we've just been joined by Nathan. Hi, Nathan.
Hello.
We've not started yet properly, so would you like to introduce yourself in the normal way, but out of sequence?
Sure. I'm Nathan Kane. I'm a developer from the United States. I'm working with and developing on TiddlyWiki for almost a year now.
Yeah,
and,
almost a year. Gosh.
Helping my girlfriend as a user.
Indeed, indeed. And last time we had a number of great questions by your girlfriend, and in fact, there's a couple of them that I did some further exploration of after the last Hangout. So we'll talk about those in a moment.
I'm not going to monopolize the call this week, so she's been doing a little better.
Well, not at all. Well, you know, so always exclaim during and after the calls. Almost anything is interesting and useful to me. And in fact, I think your girlfriend's use cases are pretty interesting. Okay, so we'll kick off with Ton's question that's in the Q&A app. I'll press the select button, so I think that means that people watching afterwards will see something flash up. Ton's question is that the tag $tags raw markup allows raw markup to be included in the generated HTML file, and Ton's asking what that means for an end user. Before I answer that, I'm just going to unblock Eric, who has joined us. Eric, hiya. Delighted you could make it and join us. How are you doing? Possibly Eric his microphone.
I'm having a bit of a malfunction with my camera at the moment, but I'm doing all right. Hello.
Hello. Well, it's good to imagine seeing you in the darkened cupboard or wherever it looks like you are in deep space. So we're just kicking off with a question from Ton, and as I was saying, any other questions? Oh, we now have Eric on camera. Eric, sorry, I should have asked you to introduce yourself. I failed to do that. Would you like to say hi and make the introductions?
Well, I guess I could, sure. Hi, I'm Eric Schulman, author of Tiddly Tools and keeper of the flame for TiddlyWiki Classic.
Indeed, and also starting a bit of a flame under TiddlyWiki 5 in that Eric's been steadily picking up more and more TiddlyWiki 5 matters on the group, culminating, I'm just going through all my email from when I was away for the last 4 or 5 days, there's a reply from you, Eric, about filter syntax that I thought was sufficiently intricate that it shows that you maybe now are a TiddlyWiki 5 expert to the same degree as your TiddlyWiki Classic expertise, or getting there anyway.
Well, to be honest, I find that the filter syntax is so subtle in some ways that it reminds me of sort of a mathematical sort of set theory kind of logic analysis sort of thing, and so, but at the same time, it's very, very powerful in a way that I see the patterns behind it. You know, and then I go, oh, okay, yeah, sure, you can do something like that. But then people try to do real-world, practical instances where they say, well, I want to have something that's 3 levels deep, and it has to have this kind of structure and hierarchy. And you go, well, okay, well, then there's a temporary variable, there's an inner loop, and then there's a whole. So but it's all embodied in this very compact syntax.
No, it's very great to hear you say that.
And so in some ways it's very powerful and super effective, but in other ways it's very daunting and technical, and I can definitely see where people are going to need guides in terms of like patterns of filtering. You know, and sort of like methodologies for figuring out what your filter should be, you know, and how to sort of unravel it top down or bottom up or sideways in or whatever the thinking that has to be to get people from I know what I want to select to how do I say that?
Yeah, no, indeed. I do wonder, though, whether one of your special skills might just be that you're quite good at interpreting my documentation, which, as we frequently discuss, borders on the terse, and you know, obviously is very difficult for a lot of people to parse. But it seems like you're quite good at picking out what's actually going on.
True. I don't want to be particularly picky about the documentation because it is a shifting target and such. And yeah, I know the tendency is to develop the functionality first and then explain it second. But sometimes in the process of developing the explanation, you find the holes because you can't really, you know what I'm saying? And so in that process, we're refining, because people will ask about certain things and say, well, how do I do that? And you go, oh, well, yeah, you can say that, but it's really quite awkward, and maybe we should rework that in order to make it more, you know, effective for that use case. And that's really the sort of the historical power from TiddlyWiki, was that it was always developed in response to people trying to do things with it and having real-world use cases for it, not sort of that theoretical. Well, you can construct something n levels deep with whatever. It was very practical. It was everyone had, and that the solution was then something that somebody, at least one person, says this has real value. As opposed to some sort of theoretical value about you. Well, you could potentially build a rocket ship with this. It doesn't matter. It's like a real world.
Well, you're the man who's built a rocket ship with TiddlyWiki Classic, I think. Okay, let's. We're going to carry on with Tom's question. So I'm going to screen share. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Good. We've got a successful Google Hangouts day today. So Tom's question, to recap, was about the tags RawMarkup tag, which allows RawMarkup to be included in the TiddlyWiki HTML file. and what does it mean for an end user. So let me just check, actually, because I'm interested whether... okay, so there is, it's mentioned in the system tags tiddler, that's good. Let's just test it out. So if I go to...
You are not screen sharing.
Oh, am I not? Some people are seeing my screen, I think, are you?
I see it, but it's not on full screen.
Let me unscreen share and screen share back again. Let's see.
It was fine here.
Okay. Okay. What are people seeing now?
Yeah.
Looks good.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good.
So I'm going to open a local empty.html. I'll create a tiddler tags raw markup, and we'll put an HTML comment in saying hello Jeremy. And now if I then save that, I'm on Chrome, so I get the not very nice unfriendly clunky save technique, but I'm saving it to my downloads folder. And now let's open that newly saved file. So it's here we go, we've got the new tiddler in. If we do a view source, which I can never remember what here we go, view source. And now I was going to search for Jeremy. That wasn't very clever, was it? There's a bit too many of them. So let's search for raw markup. Oh, no, we need to search for hello. Oh. Well, it may be that we've... Ah, yes, of course. Okay. Sorry. I'm always a bit embarrassed about the questions that end up just displaying my rather clumsy inability to think on my feet. But it looks like it's not working. What's supposed to happen is that any tiddler carrying that tag is baked into the HTML file as... Oh yeah, no, there it is. It's... No, that's the... Oh, here we go. Sorry, don't know what happened there. I was searching incorrectly. So, correction, it does work fine. Basically, if in your TiddlyWiki you have a tiddler tagged raw markup, then it will get squirted into the head section of the resulting HTML file. So the purpose is the same as what in TiddlyWiki Classic was called, what was it called? The raw markup stuff. Eric, help me.
Markup, pre-add, markup, post-add.
Yeah, of course. So these were, in TiddlyWiki Classic, we had specially named tiddlers that were baked into, whose contents was baked into the HTML file. What we've got in TiddlyWiki 5 is instead we're using tags, so that means that you can have any number of raw markup tiddlers in effect. So rather than, so back in TiddlyWiki Classic, it was a bit of a nuisance for plugins to try and use those tiddlers because they risked clobbering the user's existing tiddlers of that title. And the purpose is the same, as I say, it's for getting things like script tags into your...
Jeremy?
Hello?
Yes. Oh, I forgot the question now. Never mind. Continue, and I'll remember the question.
So that's it, really. I mean, it's a technique that it's not terribly TiddlyWiki 5-ish because it obviously only works in the browser. So, but having said that, there are plenty of libraries that only make sense in the browser. And so integrating them via the raw markup tag is a reasonable way to go. We could try and...
I remembered.
Oh, go on then.
Okay. The order in which things would, if they're tagged, obviously you have the general sort of mechanism for controlling the order in which a tagged thing is processed, with the before list and after list and all those sort of things. So is that how you would control the order? Because obviously for something like markup, that ordering can be extremely critical to having it work.
Yes, so that's exactly.
So you'd have to be very careful to explain to people how to get the correct order. The other thing is, in Classic, there was the 4 markup tiddlers representing 4 distinct places within the file that markup could be inserted. But I'm not sure if those were the definitive all possible useful places. So I'm wondering if there's additional insertion points.
I mean, I always thought that this was, I mean, I obviously we added those additional places in response to user requests, but as you were implying, it is a bit of a it's a bit of an arms race to make sure that you've chosen the right places for markup to be inserted. It's possible that we should change this to be raw markup end head. What would be the classic equivalent? Post head, I suppose it would be, wouldn't it? Raw markup. That maybe this tag should be renamed raw markup post head, and we should introduce the other 3. But it's quite a lot of complexity. Not absolutely clear to me that this is a feature that I really want to encourage. I mean, I think of it as a bit of a hack, and I would expect that if a plugin was doing it, I'd expect a plugin author should be prepared to insert stuff themselves. If you've got a plugin that only needs got JavaScript code that's needed at some point during the startup process, you can generally manage that in JavaScript, if you see what I mean.
Now, the way that the insertion is done is through the template for the output, correct?
Yes, that's right. So
because this is for generating the standalone.
Yes, that's right.
Version. So there's a template of output, and so in theory, the mechanism is you can add any kind of a marker position. Like you have right there, you have the raw markup.
That's right. So
in there. So if somebody needed a different place, you could tell them they have to customize the template in order to add their insertion point and the tag that they want it to correspond to.
Yes, and I think that would be not unreasonable. I mean, if you're making extensive use of the raw markup facility, then what you're creating is, well, I mean, it is a TiddlyWiki file, but it's not a standard TiddlyWiki file, and yes, using an alternative template is not unreasonable. But I do notice that right now the template for the standalone TiddlyWiki 5 file, it's kind of big and complex. It's not really the sort of thing that ideally we would have people cloning. But then again, when the complexity is just because there's a lot of things going on, but the things that are going on are very simple and very consistent. There's a tiny amount of HTML markup and lots of transclusions, and those transclusions by definition are very well defined. The actions that they perform. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it develops. I think maybe I'll make a note, because I think maybe I should change raw markup to raw markup post head, just to give us a bit of headroom, because otherwise if we do add other insertion points, we'll end up with confusing names.
Jeremy, just a couple of quick comments on this.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that duplicating that template and introducing my own additional tags for raw markup is something I found myself doing several times in the past.
Oh, really? Okay.
In TiddlyWiki 5 to accomplish that. So I think that is something that is worthwhile.
Can you take us through some of the use cases for that?
I'm sorry?
Can you take us through some of the use cases for that? What sort of things are you needing to do?
Mostly in loading libraries that have their own DOM manipulations that in some way conflict with TiddlyWiki's own DOM handling mechanisms.
Okay.
So great example of this that I keep coming back to in my work is the X3 DOM library. I've yet to find a good way to sort of cleanly pluginize the whole thing, and not fall back to some form of raw markup for this or that bit of integration with it. It's been since before I started joining in on these calls, it's been a goal of mine to cleanly package it as a plugin, and I've never really been able to. Just because it has sort of its own notion of a render tree mapping and its own DOM handling that conflicts.
Well, that's great. I mean, X3 DOM, I think maybe I remember you showing me this before, but it's cool. And we absolutely, I'd like to do everything I can to support the goal of getting it cleanly packaged. It looks like it makes a good example of a complicated thing, and we like those.
And then just my third quick comment would be in regards to watching my girlfriend go through the whole learning process. I will say that the point where she sort of discovered raw markup was sort of the same point where she sort of started delving into that template. It is what sort of drove her into that code.
Yeah.
And I think that point, seeing how TiddlyWiki's own root structure behaved, was really where the concept of filtering as selection for transclusion and componentizing things into sort of this separation of system metadata and user metadata really started to sort of click for her, was in looking at and working with and deriving her own template from that point. So I think that we might actually want to not try and hide or containerize too much of that process, because I think that it almost represents sort of a critical learning point for new plugin developers, for new content creators, and so forth.
So the argument might be then that that it's better for people to learn how to take complete control by creating their own top-level template than us, in fact, making that top-level template itself much more complicated and hard to understand by trying to cater in advance for all possible use cases.
Right, and we don't want to give people gloves that are so thick that they can't manipulate the thing anymore to protect them from being burned by the thing. Yeah.
Okay, well, following up that logic, do you think that we should keep the current tag of tags raw markup, or do you think that we should change it to raw markup post head?
Well, the only real input that I would have there is the only other sort of critical place that I could imagine wanting sort of a second raw markup tag would be at the end of body. Because there are some libraries that are finicky about being loaded at the end of the DOM load. So I think that perhaps raw markup head and raw markup body or something along those lines might be sufficient.
Yes, I guess there'd be an immediate question as to whether you'd want those libraries to be before or after the boot kernel, wouldn't there? We might need to cater for both. Do you think?
I think so. I think that it's going to be a rare case that the distinction matters, but I think that we should have the same facility for when it does. There's very few libraries that are going to be concerned with whether they're loaded in the head or loaded at the end of the body, but I know that some do.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll take that as the rationale for going ahead and adding a couple more of these then, a couple more of the markup tags. Anything else on this topic of the raw markup tag? Oh, I'm not screen sharing, I noticed. How did that happen? I thought I was. Any other questions on the raw markup stuff? Okay. Another question from Ton. How to get the readme tiddler of a plugin to show up as readme information together with the plugin in tab Plugins of ControlPanel. When building plugins in the browser, it doesn't, although it is available as a shadow tiddler. I wouldn't have expected it to behave any differently in the browser, but let me try to screen share again and just show you the background and then answer the question. So the feature that Tom's asking about is the way that now some of the, and soon all of the system plugins, core plugins, when you open up this chevron, you get a set of tabs with one or more information tiddlers, by convention, a readme tiddler being one of them. I can't remember actually if I gave any of them more than one readme. I don't think I did, no. Anyway, so the mechanism is documented in the plugin mechanism tiddler, and it's here, the stuff, information tiddlers for plugins, that's what we call them. And you basically, there's two categories actually. There's an icon, which is all that a plugin needs to do is to contain a tiddler with that specific title, core icon. So I guess I can show you that. If we take something like the Markdown plugin that I've just been playing around with, and let's think the best way to do that. I think we need a bitmap. Now, I won't do that now because I think preparing a image will be a bit of a pain. But anyway, you can see an example of it if we search for so sorry, again, Jeremy thinking on his feet. So the core plugin has an icon, and you can see it here in the repo. There's, if we go into the core folder, so everything in this core folder is what gets made into the core plugin, and you can see that there's a tiddler called core/icon, and that's the icon that you see there. So if the Markdown plugin wanted to add an icon, it would be, it would have a title like that, and I don't know, I think actually if I put text in it, I have a feeling that'll probably work, but we'll give it a go. Now I'm just rebuilding the Markdown demo, which includes that Markdown plugin, and open the local version of Markdown demo. And now when we go into the plugins tab, we don't see an icon. Oh, I think because it is transcluded with the image tag. So let's give it let's just grab an image from up here. Hang on. Okay, so I really hate doing this stuff on the fly, and it's still not worked, so it probably means that I've done something stupid. Okay, sorry guys. I don't like doing this, trying to debug things on the fly. I always find when I try and do this stuff that I'm making some stupid trivial error and unable to see it. So unless anybody else can help me debug what I just did, I'm going to back off and just return to the documentation where we started. So oh, okay. I think that is that.
You hear me?
Hello.
I just reread the plugin mechanism documentation, and if it doesn't work, then I'll come back in the group.
Yes, okay. Now, of course, I'm getting interested in it. Let's just have a very quick look here at the code that brings in the icon and see if we can see what's going on. Right. So I don't know if you could see that, but there's something very basic going on, which is that the icon isn't being included in the file at all. Did I rebuild it? That is the correct one to build. Oh, of course, of course. So, guys, I'm really sorry. I was opening the wrong file. I'm opening one on that URL. The one that I should be looking at is this. So I told you it was no fun watching Jeremy being stupid, but there you go. So long drawn out 5 minutes of tedium watching Jeremy hit his head on a low door, but adding an icon to a plugin is incredibly simple. All I actually did was added a tiddler with the name of the plugin plus /icon and gave it one of the image types. Okay, so now just having a quick look back at those docs, we'll just look at adding a readme file. So for, sorry, readme tiddler. So for the, apart from the icon, the other things that you do is specify the names of the readme tiddlers in the list field of the plugin itself. So if we look at something like the, so the highlight plugin, you can see that the list field specified in the plugin.info file contains just the word license. So now we'll copy that into the plugin.info for the mark-in tiddler, and we'll change it to Hangout demo, and then we'll add a new tiddler to the right name. Yeah, we'll add a new tiddler. Markdown plugin, and I think the mail say no, that should be fine. So now rebuild it and find the right tab, and now when we go to Control Panel, yeah, so now there's a tab called Hangout Demo. The reason why most plugins provide a info tiddler called readme is because that's the one that's open by default. So if you may not have spotted it, but when I first went in here, although there is content in the Hangout Demo tab, it doesn't show up until I click on it, and that's because it's aiming for the wrong default tiddler. So, Ton, I'm so sorry to make the most confused, convoluted explanation, but hopefully you can see that there are two steps to adding a README. So the first is in the to add to the plugin tiddler itself a list field that gives the suffix of the name of the tiddler, and then the tiddler itself that contains the information you want to expose is the name of the plugin plus a slash plus the name of the information tiddler, or the suffix of the information tiddler name. And that's all there is to it. And obviously you can add as many as you like. The thing to be aware of, though, is that in some situations, for instance with themes, a theme that isn't the active theme, although it'll show the README tiddler, that README tiddler will be rendered in a context where the other tiddlers within that plugin aren't available because the plugin hasn't been switched in. So that means that for themes and languages, you'd generally want to try and create standalone information tiddlers. For a plugin that's actually installed and enabled, it can obviously reference any other tiddler within that plugin. So Tom, my apologies, as I say, for that very tortuous explanation, but did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. And for sure, I'll give it a try and see, getting a README.
It also shows how incredibly confusing the feature of filing systems is of having files with the same name in multiple folders. Okay, so any other questions at this point from anybody? Because if not, what I suggest we do is just have a quick review of 5.0.15 features. There are a couple of bits that I did after the last Hangout, and then talk a little about plans for the full release of TiddlyWiki 5. Did we touch on that last week? I can't remember who was here, who was also here last week.
Just very briefly, you sort of outlined roughly what you thought the timeline would be, but not much beyond that.
Okay. So let me then screen share, and I'll just go to the commit log. So I think the changes, okay, so one of the changes that made it into 15 was from you, Nathan, which was adding the alt attribute to the image widget.
I actually just opened a ticket on that. I realized I had never opened the tickets from last week that we'd brought up.
Okay.
But I think the ticket's still valid because I also talk in there about arbitrary attributes on arbitrary render tree elements, which I think is still a good goal.
Yes, I think that's exactly the problem that we should solve. I mean, it may be that there's short term that there are more specific attributes that we should add in order to keep people afloat, but I'd certainly be interested in a robust mechanism along the lines you suggest. There's something that I think happened after the Hangout was Xavier's suggestion of what we do with the banner, encouraging people to make documentation improvements. I was quite pleased with it, actually. I think during the Hangout last week, I had this banner in the view template so that it was visible for every tiddler, and of course it just looks awful. And it's also not really relevant. Xavier's suggestion of putting it in the edit template makes perfect sense, because clicking the edit button is a great way to express your intention to edit a tiddler, and obviously the banner makes that actionable. I did add some documentation on how to make documentation changes via GitHub, without having to do anything like entirely on the GitHub website, without having to without having to load anything to your machine or install Git or anything. So hopefully that will help. I think the other things are, pretty minor, in fact. Yeah. So 5.16 plans. My plan is to release 5.16 on Thursday. So this is as I mentioned last week, I think the start of trying to do weekly releases until we get to the release date on the 20th. This is my list of things that I'd like to try and do before the end of the beta period. Probably ought to share this more effectively with you, but to give you a flavor of it, it's things like worrying about the consistency of CSS class names. So there's a common class name you get is button-invisible. So these guys, for instance, have a CSS class. Does it? Oh no, that one's a link, so that was a bad example. Yes, class button-invisible. That was that dates from when TiddlyWiki 5 used Bootstrap, and it's a Bootstrap class name. Subsequent to that, I've tended to use TW- to identify TiddlyWiki classes. So there's a clear inconsistency. Again, there's a backwards compatibility issue, but we can at least resolve it with a deprecated plugin, in that we could move the button invisible class definition into a deprecated plugin, or at least a deprecated module, and then pull it out at some point in the future. There's also a related thing that the TW- prefix is used for 3 different things: CSS classes, TiddlyWiki messages, and variables. And it is possible that it would be more Hungarian to make those prefixes reflect the type. So TWC, TWM, and TWV, I guess. Uncertain whether it's worth doing that bit, but I think this we definitely need to do, because otherwise it's quite embarrassing.
Jeremy, I think that those are both pretty important things. The TW dash prefix, I know, I did watch that cause some confusion for Sarah, and conflicts on class names I've seen her run into multiple times. And you know where you really easily run into conflicts on class names? Is if you try and bring Twitter Bootstrap back into the picture.
Okay. Of course, yes, of course. I mean, and I don't know, are there other frameworks that use that have adopted Bootstrap's class names?
I don't know of any offhand, but I would not be surprised.
So, okay, well, that's it's one of those bits of work that's a pretty terrifying piece of daredevil search and replace. So, but at least those changes actually are quite easy to eyeball. So we'll appreciate it when the time comes if people can help me with that. The JSHint thing, if I, for a joke, do JSHint core, you'll see that there's quite a lot of JSHint noise. So, and you know, as ever, one could, actually it's not that many. If I do it, not like that, I need to do that, don't I? Oh, I see. I need to do that. No? Yes. Is that the one that says 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages? And a lot of them obviously are the same problem cropping up in multiple places.
Formatting errors. Some of those are likely mine.
Could be. And there are some things that, I mean, if I was feeling bullshit, I might argue about. So in these kinds of situations, I often use that notation to be consistent with with places where I'm forced to use it because I've got dashes and so on in the field names. So in some of those cases, it may also be a matter of putting in JSHint directives, to tell it to shut up. Let me change it now. I'm no longer considering switching to Font Awesome before getting out of beta. I obviously think it would be useful for people to be able to use Font Awesome if they want to, and I don't really see a problem with that. And if somebody wanted to do a plugin that replaced the core images with the associated appropriate Font Awesome markup, that should work fine. The tag pointer is obviously about content that we right now, some inconsistencies where early on I was quite enthusiastic about tagging things, but now I think we've got too many tags. We've also got too many tags with too few members, things like planning, those kind of things. An allied thing that may or may not be recorded here is that I want to move to an automatically generated table of contents, which is obviously was half done in 15, where we've got the table of contents macro now, which I think I showed during the last Hangout. So this is tag based, and we've, in response to feedback, made the macro reasonably flexible. Lets you do straightforward hierarchical lists, lets you control the sorting and so on. So the plan is that we'll bring that into here, and all this stuff will be tag driven. The trapping of Ctrl-S, we're still getting cases where people, well, obviously I mean Command-S as well, where particularly in Firefox, people do a Ctrl-S, they expect it to do a save, and obviously it does a well, it does a browser dependent thing. On most browsers, it saves a snapshot of the original page source, and in Firefox, it saves a snapshot of the current DOM state. Preliminary Googling I've done suggests that it is perfectly possible to trap Ctrl-S on all browsers, and I think that would be desirable. Finalizing the core macros, there's quite a few classic macros that are really overdue for introduction. Let me know where the is there a okay, so this is, I think, the closest we've got to a list of tags in, I'm sorry, to a list of macros in TiddlyWiki Classic. A lot of them, tiddler, timeline, tags, tagging, tag, we can, I think, support directly. Things like these ones that generate buttons, I'm slightly less inclined to implement because there's already, TiddlyWiki 5 gives quite a lot of flexibility for managing buttons as it is. Things like all tags would be fairly straightforward. So, and then there's, I think, also a few macros that would make sense in a TiddlyWiki 5 context. I mean, i.e. that don't derive from TiddlyWiki Classic, that just try to encapsulate some of the common idioms. So, for instance, we don't, well, slider, of course, is in TiddlyWiki Classic, but we don't have a slider macro. And when we do, it'll probably be different syntax than this one. I'm worried about whether I've got all my acknowledgements in place. Need to be consistent about readmes for plugins. This one, switching to Flexbox for sidebars, this is a long-standing wriggle that, as Ton has discovered, if you add a top bar across the top of the screen, the story river position doesn't adjust to accommodate it. And similarly, when you've got the sidebar visible, it's a very clunky, brutal technique that we use to take the sidebar space away from the story river. So what I would like to do is to make it more responsive so that when you add a that you can add a sidebar at any side of the screen, and that when you do so, the story river automatically resizes to accommodate it. I was thinking that the way to do that was with Flexbox, but I'm now thinking that we don't need to use Flexbox. I've got been making some notes about it, and we'll try and hit that fairly soon. Backwards compatibility of links, that we've still got a lot of the content in here. A lot of the resources that we're pointing to here are currently not compatible with the latest versions of TiddlyWiki, so they need to be archived, and we need to make sure that we only link to stuff that works. That point is generally I actually need to reorganize the control panel. There's features like, I think the toolbar stuff is a bit deeply hidden, and advanced settings, those settings, particularly toolbar buttons, is hardly an advanced setting. So I think settings needs to move up to be a top level thing. There's some inconsistencies with the way that autosave is here, but it really should be wherever these other settings are. And the specific point that's written down here about moving the advanced panes out of their own namespace, the issue there is that these tabs of the control panel, their titles have advanced in them, which means that which implies that if we move a tab up a level, that we have to rename the tiddlers that comprise that tag. That comprise that tab, which seems wrong. That's a very specific documentation point. This is something that a few people have suggested, that all, you'll be familiar if I search for that string in the source code. An awful lot of the time you see constructions like this, where we grab all shadow and ordinary tiddlers, filter to just the ones with a particular tag, and then we have to make sure that we exclude the drafts. So you can make a case for all shadows plus tiddlers automatically excluding drafts. It would mean that it's kind of messy from a layering point of view, because it means that the boot kernel would know about drafts, which at the moment it doesn't. But I think the fact that this is such a pain in the neck and needs to be done consistently makes it an attractive change. It would, the only backwards incompatibility it would set up, of course, is that the actual list of drafts would need changing in order to make sure that instead of all shadows plus tiddlers, it was all shadows plus tiddlers. Well, in fact, it would just be all drafts at that point, I suppose. The tiddler folders thing is about the organization of the TW5 repo that I made an early attempt, or early on I made an attempt to organize the main documentation wiki into subfolders. So, and for the most part, those subfolders correspond to tags. I find it quite useful when I'm editing stuff under Node.js to be able to, see all the related stuff together. But there's an awful lot of tiddlers here that are in the root that haven't gone into a folder that really should do, and just need to make sure that the set of folders we're using is reasonable. Another documentation point, another consistency point, that we've got some configuration tiddlers. Sorry, actually, no, I've done this. This was that prior to 5.15 we had a core config folder and a core wiki config folder, but I've now moved everything into wiki config. This guy is a tricky one, that the current behavior of the style block syntax is weird. What it actually does is applies the style to the elements that it contains, rather than creating an element that carries that style. That's problematic because we can't actually consistently apply styles to every type of element. We can't apply styles to, many widgets don't take a style parameter, for instance. So I'm beginning to think that the right way to do this is for the style block to always generate a div that carries the styles. The downside of that is that you can see this example here. It actually applies the style to the UL. That's pretty useful for, well, actually, I think it was because of Bootstrap originally that I wanted to do this, because there are frameworks, conventions that like you to be able to do that. But I think it's simpler to have the style block create a div, and then if somebody does want to class the actual UL, that they just use HTML. So I think I've mentioned this before, that I quite like the idea of keeping the Wikitext syntax as brutally simple as possible, safe in the knowledge that people can step into raw HTML if they wish to do anything more complicated. And I'm sure you'll all have found that there are many reasons why it's often convenient to do lists in HTML, particularly if you're automatically generating the list. Oh, and this one's an embarrassment, but nobody ever mentions this. But if you do a view source, you'll find a few places, and it turns out that this wasn't an example, where we've got spans containing divs. Where else does it crop up? okay, well, I won't try and hunt for an example right now, but that's yes, no, Jeremy didn't get sucked into trying to search for an example, but that needs to be sorted out, and that I think might set up some minor incompatibilities as well. And a problem that a few people have noted is that these buttons that have drop downs, those drop downs don't work if you access the buttons via this more menu. And the reason is because we don't support multiple levels of pop-ups, and we do need to. So it's actually a fairly meaty one, but that would, that means that there'd be a little right arrow here and then a sub menu. So quite a lot of things. Some of them are, say, kind of tedious and error prone. So that's a bit worrying. Want to get those ones done as quickly as possible. Some of them are sort of backwards incompatibility things, and quite meaty, like that styled block thing. But I think it's all doable in the timescales that I've set myself, of releasing on the 20th of September. Let me see if I can find the. So I think I showed this last time, but this is the rough idea that well, I was saying a release every Tuesday, but in fact, having only come back from being away today, I'm going to do this week's release on Thursday. Then at some point, hopefully around then, do a feature complete freeze where from that point on, the focus would be on fixing bugs, inconsistencies and documentation, and resisting the temptation to add new features. So it really means we've probably only got another couple of weeks where these kinds of big, potentially breaking changes can be done. Any questions on any of this? Rather chaotic walk through my to-do list.
Is this all for number 16?
No, this is the list of things for before coming out of beta.
There's one thing that I just noticed is that when TiddlyWiki is made to autosave, and you exit a tiddler saving it, actually the save button stays red. Is that on purpose?
No, it's that. So if let's switch. I assume I'm still screen sharing. Yes, good. So if I refresh, I do new tiddler. So now it's red immediately because at this point, in fact, 2 tiddlers have been created, both draft of new tiddler and the underlying new tiddler itself is being created. If I cancel, they both get deleted, but the red status comes from the fact that there is a queue of changes that have not yet been saved, and the algorithm for tracking those changes is not smart enough to realize that those changes cancel each other out. So the fix for this, if we were to fix it, would be actually a bit of a nuisance, that we'd have to, in the save handler, which is here, at the moment, you can see that each time we get a so we got this count of the number of tasks, which basically each time we get a tiddler change, all it does is counts up the number of tiddlers that have changed and then increases this number of tasks in the queue. So there's no interpretation of the changes that have been made. I'm very uncertain whether it's worth trying to fix this, because the dirty handling is already fairly inaccurate. I mean, if I open that pop-up, that obviously, sorry, refresh so we don't have a red save icon. But doing that creates a tiddler. So there is built in, there is a filter that says actually state tiddlers don't contribute to the thing turning red. And I kind of, that sort of makes sense because you don't want the thing going red all the time. But it just shows that that's actually quite a high level sort of user-oriented feature saying, "Oh, you better save." It strikes me that if we make it more complicated, there's a risk that it doesn't go red at times when it should be red, and that seems bad because that could lead to data loss, where sort of false positives where it's red where it doesn't really need to be. I can see that it's making people go, "Oh, why doesn't it do that?" But the reason why it doesn't do that is because it doesn't do that, and I don't think it actually has much of an impact, does it?
So the autosave and the explicit save are different saves.
I actually was answering a slightly different question. I think I forgot that you were asking about autosave. So what your concern is that I've got autosave turned on in this wiki. So you're saying let's do a save so the thing's clear. So the problem is if I do new tiddler and then cancel.
No, do not cancel, just save it. Click the tick.
Oh, okay. Well, let me refresh again. So I do new tiddler, right, and I get a saved wiki notification.
And here's the confusion. It says saved, but still stays red.
Ah, I see. Sorry, I was not at all what I understood. Okay, that's a bug, isn't it?
So it's not about the complex stuff that you just talked about.
No, it's not at all. I mean, well, what you're pointing at here is completely a bug. That should clear after the autosave. And I wonder why it doesn't. Okay, well, I'll make a note of that and look at that after this session.
Are we into general bug issue discussion now?
Yes, we're open to any questions.
I've got one. It's kind of funny. It's amusing. So I went to TiddlyWiki.com and I decided to enter my username on the control panel.
Yeah.
And so I figured I'd just use my initials, ELS. So I went to the username, I typed in ELS, fine. And then I thought, oh, I want to see where it saved that. So I went to look at the username Tiddler.
Yeah.
And if we go and take a look at the username Tiddler, we'll see that it has ELS in it. But look who the author of it is.
Oh.
Yeah, the last keystroke. Oops.
That's cute.
I mean, it's not strictly a critical error, but it could be because if you consider that some people might have some ownership of the Tiddler issues with, it's got to be the right username to match up.
I don't understand that at all. It's interesting, as you note, it's not the final character, it's the last character typed, which, no, but it's not even that. Do you see that now? Oh, I see. Yes, it is. How weird. And okay.
It almost seems like there needs to be one more keystroke handling event.
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's the order of event handling. I think that at the time. Literally at the time that we write the username Tiddler, okay, so just before we write it, we read the current username. The current username hasn't been changed yet to the last character, so it reads that username. and then it's setting the new username, and after that, of course, then any subsequent change will get the new username. So I think, in fact, what needs to happen is, what's that difficult status username? I think that in here we need some special handling. It's actually going to be a real nuisance to do, I just noticed. But here we need to check basically if the tiddler that is being changed is the username tiddler. Then we'll need to rather than read the username tiddler, we'll need to use the incoming value. So in fact, I think that's quite a major refactoring. Does that make sense? So you can see this get creation fields, that's called in many places where a tiddler is being modified. So for instance, in the navigator widget, when we save a new tiddler, you can see it's calling that guy get creation fields, but it's calling get creation fields obviously before it does the write of the tiddler. So you can see how the two things get out of step. It may be this is the only place I need to have special handling actually. There's an equivalent thing where we have some special, yes, here we go. We have some special handling for saving the current story tiddler in a similar way, because that will also break without special handling. But thank you, Eric. Very well spotted.
Thank you. I do what I can.
Any more for any more? Sorry, I was plugging in, seeing myself going down to 15%. Any other questions, comments? From anybody? Thoughts? Oh, I see we were joined briefly by Matthew, who's then left again. Who's somebody who I think we've seen on the group, but I don't think we've seen on a Hangout before. That's a shame. What else might we look at then? Oh yes, Nathan, one of the bugs that we discussed last week was saving a tiddler that started with a slash. Let me screen share, and you'll remember that I tested it then and there for me, and it also didn't work. But in fact, it turned out that just before the last Hangout, I had managed to completely break syncing of tiddlers in the client server version. Once I'd mended that, then for me, this kind of thing does in fact work correctly. So if I go back to the terminal, you can see it saved that tiddler. So I think this must be the Apache issue of Apache not liking URLs with slashes in certain places. Do you think that's possible?
Maybe. Well, I don't know. I'll have to revisit that. I'll have to revisit that.
Wait, are you accessing it? Are you proxying through Apache?
No, we're bringing everything through IIS.
Okay.
It was exhibiting the same behavior whether I was going through IIS or directly to the TiddlyWiki server. So I don't know. I'll have to look into it again and get you some more
Okay.
information on reproducing it.
So it
Again.
looks like it's exactly the same problem as with Apache then.
It may be. It may be.
Um, that's a nuisance. So there's an outstanding ticket on the Apache side. Gosh, Apache side sounds like I'm going to murder Apache, doesn't it? There we go. As I mentioned in this ticket, the symptom is that was reported originally here is we get a 404, and that 404 is generated by Apache, and TiddlyWiki never sees it. So it seems possible that TiddlyWiki, when it generates 404s, could add a header to the 404 so that the client code can verify that it really is a 404 and that the request hasn't been blocked by an intermediate proxy. On this ticket, there is a suggestion for fixing it, but of course, the fix, just by replacing the encoded 2Fs with slashes, ultimately will break things. So that's not so good. Okay, so in fact, this is the ticket that that you should maybe add on to, Nathan. Expressing it as a feature request. Mm-hmm. Well, oh gosh, and there's a very strange bug that I don't think I've added. I don't think I've created a ticket for, but you can see on my machine how quickly I can switch tabs. If I turn on encryption, for reasons that I don't understand at all, the refresh cycle slows down really alarmingly, and that I need to fix as well. Right, and those two things from last week I haven't done yet. Yeah.
Is the encryption plugin doing any processing at those times? I mean, I would think that.
No, I think it's somehow making something that is being refreshed is sensitive to the encryption state in a way that makes no sense to me at all. But those are my favorite kind of bugs, the ones that prima facie seem like evidence of demons and witchcraft, are the ones that are all head scratchers, particularly as we saw earlier when the solution turns out to be that Jeremy was opening the wrong file. But here I'm not so certain. There is a point in the main TiddlyWiki template that where it's selective on the encryption status. So if I search for, I think it's called that. Yeah, if I search for is encrypted, you can see here. So this is the template that's included by the main static file template that includes the actually that was a bad example. It's this one. This is the template for the store area. So it's got a couple of reveal widgets and renders differently for encryption being off versus encryption being on. But that's the only place that I'm aware of where rendering is selective based on the encryption status. So goodness knows what's going on. Very peculiar. But I think that's probably everything that's in my head after my little break for the last week. On the screen share. So any other questions or comments from anybody?
Actually, it's Leo. Sorry. It is actually more like a feature request and probably for a later time, because right now I understand the plate is full with the last-minute bug fixes before the release, but just in case, it would be very useful if TiddlyWiki will have a sort of a tiddler drawing area. So if one can, so that one can draw using a mouse or a graphical tablet like Wacom tablet. So it will really help adoption of TiddlyWiki among college students.
Yes, I mean, we've got, I'm sure you've seen, we've got partial support for that, but let me screen share. So it's an interesting category of feature that I think we've got good plumbing for, but at a sort of higher level, it's not necessarily very well integrated. If I create a new tiddler and then switch its type to PNG, then automatically the tiddler changes to a scratch pad that I can draw on. So the issues with it, obviously, are things like the mechanism I use to change the size of the tiddler is very tedious. I have to type its size there. And at the moment, there's only one line thickness and one color. So we clearly need some kind of toolbar here for selecting different bitmap editing tools. My original goal was to incorporate an off-the-shelf the canvas editor. You know, there's quite a few nice implementations.
Jeremy,
Play.
From a higher level sort of user interaction standpoint, I remember there was a message on the groups about someone who was trying to get it so that they had a fixed editing area, and then when they would hit done, they wanted it to save that tiddler and then sort of give a fresh editing zone. The sense I got was that they wanted to have one area for entering content and then just sort of hit the save whenever they felt it was good to spawn off a tiddler from it. And I'm thinking for a as was suggested that for a note-taking application, especially, I could picture on a tablet having one free-form drawing area and then just tapping the save and having it save that off as okay, that's my sketch, and then giving you a fresh sketching area as a very rapid way of gathering hand-drawn notes, like while in class or something.
Yes, I was switching to Alberto's TiddlyWiki for Scholars because I had recalled, but it looks like I'm wrong, that maybe it does it in view mode. That in an earlier iteration of it, he had, for all these extra things that I can add onto a tiddler, so such as a journal entry, I'm pretty sure that he had the form, the creation form, showing automatically. So if I, yes, in fact, that is the case. So if I switch on, sorry, I'm not explaining myself well at all, but if I press plus to turn on the editor is then persistent, and each entry as I create an entry, it creates that entry, and you can see it down here, no, there, and leaves the form open. So that shows that it's eminently possible to do that. And yes, I agree. It'd be kind of a kind of a Tumblr blog TiddlyWiki. I don't know if you remember when Tumblr started, and Posterous for that matter. The thing that was taken to be different about it was that its user interface encouraged you to blog in a more Twitter-like way, where you just sort of dash things off with an emphasis on speed and responsiveness, rather than the sort of WordPress model of a carefully curated set of drafts that you that you work on and then publish. And yeah, that's that would be cool. So I think there's two things we can pick out of that. One is it would be nice to integrate a better bitmap editor, and that we shouldn't have to write that ourselves. And the second thing is how it would be good to see some more exploration of fundamentally different user interface metaphors. So I mean, TiddlyWiki, the way it works in terms of what happens when you press the new tiddler button, and how you flick between edit mode and view mode, all that behavior is inherited from TiddlyWiki Classic, and it's certainly not necessarily the best approach for every use case, I guess. And I would love to see more things, like Alberto's work here, where there's starting to create customized user interface so that particular conventions are easier to achieve, is a really nice approach. Okay, and in fact, I'm now wondering. In fact, look, Alberto has literally already done it. That if I use any of these new button guys, so let's make new notes. Each time I add a note, you can see it's been added, but I've still got the form for adding a new one. So I mean, perhaps with decent focus handling, so that it refocused on the title after I added a tiddler, that might well be what is being asked for. Into classic view, so it's a bit easier to see. Great piece of work, this. Been really fun watching Alberto improve it. One minor change that I have just made in response to, I think it was your feedback, Branimir, wasn't it? That previously, if you clicked refresh, it would clear the permalink. So I'm on Alberto's site with a permalink. If I do a browser refresh, therefore it'll reopen the same tiddlers, and you can't really see that because it's changed the story view, but there you go. It's reopened the same tiddlers. If I click the TiddlyWiki's refresh button, then I go back to the default tiddlers because it clears the location hash. So I've now changed that such that if I do a permaview now, if I use the TiddlyWiki's refresh, it leaves the permalink, the location hash, in place.
Yeah, correct. It was me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's clearer, and for me personally more useful, because I use permalinks a lot when I'm when I was, for instance, doing all this stuff in the control panel to add the disabled button and so on. That was I was endlessly needing to revisit this tiddler, and obviously to do that I permalinked it, and so I've got into the habit of always using the browser refresh just in order to preserve that. But I do see that for TiddlyDesktop particularly, it makes sense, given that we don't have a browser refresh button, it makes sense to implement the browser refresh functionality within TiddlyWiki.
Yeah, I saw you changed it, and I can't wait to get it in number 16.
You'll only have to wait till Thursday.
Thanks.
With any luck. The other thing that I'm hoping to do for 16 is sorting out the top bar menu, so that this same set of buttons that we've got here, the page control buttons as they're called, that one can independently hide and show the page control buttons here and also in the top bar. There's a couple of issues with making that efficient, but that is the intention. Right now, I think there's separate tags for where is it? Right, top right bar, and I think there's top left bar, isn't there, Tom?
Yes.
And if in order to make it so that this entire set of buttons were available here, here, and here, is going to require quite a lot of tiddlers. So I don't know, it may be that we'll change this to just be a top bar, and then encourage people to use CSS to left and right justify things within each top bar, rather than the core creating separate areas for the left and right. Okay, let me. Any other questions, comments, guys?
Yeah, I have something for you.
Go for it, Matt.
I don't know if you remember last time, a couple times ago, I was bringing up the issue of menus and them being too low in the DOM. And given that you are looking at redoing cascading menus, and given that they're going to use the same pop-up mechanism, I'd like to replead my case on the issues with that matter, and thinking that by moving them up in the DOM like to body, that's going to be what you need to do in the long run. Before, the objections were, well, the menu has to be at that location in the DOM to absorb all the CSS above it in order to display properly, but that doesn't seem like like your menu should be, you know, not dependent on that much on where it is.
Well, I can show you an example where it is, of course.
Yeah.
That when I'm in Cecily view, we've got CSS transforms applied to all the tiddlers in the story view. So if the pop-up were somewhere else in the DOM, it would make life a lot more complicated to duplicate the same CSS transforms on the pop-up.
Right. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to, you know, manually determine the source of your click and the source element, and move it, you know, move the menu box to its proper location, you know, if it's going to be on the body. But here's what you're losing. When you constrain a menu's width at all or height at all,
yeah,
you're not going to be able to put yet another menu inside that box because it's going to be clipped. Do you see what I'm saying?
But we can use overflow settings to stop it being clipped. Can't we?
Right. But then your content will overflow. For instance, if you have, you know, a long title in your thing and you're not doing clipping, then your text that runs off.
Yes, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. But however, I do not think that the solution you're suggesting is practical, because to duplicate the CSS, so if we make this pop-up be somewhere else in the DOM, to duplicate the CSS of the site where it is being displayed requires the core to know all the CSS properties that need to be transferred. And that's tricky because CSS keeps getting extended.
Right.
Prefixes get lost. Prefixes get new prefix properties get added. So I can't really see a robust and future-proof way of doing it. I mean, for the core itself, which is obviously only using a kind of predefined subset of CSS, it would be practical, but it would, as I say, make things like Cecily incredibly hard. But I take your point about the multi-level pop-ups being tricky otherwise.
Yeah, I mean the whole situation's a nightmare because the browsers I don't think are operating right on their approach. When you constrain, there should be a way to pop out of that constraint, right?
Yes. Gosh, I mean, I suppose my fallback, if we can't do any better, would be to make it so that a sub pop-up was in line. So obviously the conventional thing, if I click the language button, would be for an overlapping menu to appear here, overlapping this one. But an alternative would be that it could behave more like a slider, so that the submenu appears in the same vertical list. Not great, but well, actually, in some ways better, because the way that submenus march across the screen horizontally, I sometimes find a bit of a nuisance. And you frequently get that thing where there isn't room for the submenu, and so it appears over at the left. And you're not expecting that because you hadn't quite judged that you'd clicked in a place where there wasn't room for it. But that may be a reasonable get out if we can't do any better.
Yeah, the reason I came across it in the first place was, the use case where you have a giant list,
Yeah.
and so now you have to rely on page scroll.
Yes.
To get down to the bottom, and so
Yeah.
I was just throwing in CSS scrolls for the individual menu, but then once you do that, you're trapped.
Yeah. Yes, interesting. I mean, I'll do some messing about, but with the proviso that Jeremy's on-the-fly brain doesn't work very well always. I think you're absolutely right, and that the only way out is going to be an inline submenu.
Right. And I, forgive me, but I still don't quite grasp, like, if you have a menu type, right?
Yeah.
Whatever, a class, this menu class, you can describe that in CSS without relying on your whole DOM tree to get back up to, the description should be, it's just this type of class of menu, and you do the JavaScript computation of where to throw it up.
Yeah.
And that's it. I don't quite get the DOM.
Well, so the issue is that I guess what I wasn't saying out loud is that, to me, if you scale a tiddler, as we do in Cecily View, then the pop-ups should scale with it. If we went with the behavior you're advocating, when I pull down this menu, it would be the same size as, for instance.
I see.
And you could make a case for why it might be useful to have a consistently sized menu, possibly. You could make that case. I guess I visualize, I've mentioned a few times, to me Cecily is more important than it might appear. I think, I actually started doing TiddlyWiki because I had been pursuing Cecily as an idea, the idea of a wiki, a wiki based on zoomable user interface principles. So it's certainly possible that I've got a rather fixed notion in my mind of an endpoint that allows for this very flexible positioning and sizing and styling of tiddlers. And that actually is possibly not as chorus, I think.
Yeah, you could go both paths, right? You could go, just open up this option, because the other use case I found really nice is that you go to a tiddler's tag and bring it up, and then you can bring up, by clicking on a sub control of that tag, you can bring up all the other tiddlers that are, I'm probably not explaining this right, but you can use that nested navigation thing to give a quick overview of what things mean again,
Oh, you mean as like a hover pop-up as I go down this menu?
Right. That you could go boom on one of those tiddlers and have it throw up all the tags it's got. You see what I'm saying? That gives a quick
I mean,
overview.
there is another issue that's going to make it harder to do as well, though, which is that at the moment the buttons inside a menu, they send their message from the place in the widget tree that they're in. So that means that the container of the thing triggering the pop-up gets to handle messages generated by the pop-up. That wouldn't happen if the pop-ups were somewhere else in the widget tree. I guess it's possible that we could explore keeping the menus in the expected place in the widget tree, whilst in the DOM tree having them freestanding under the body. But it would require some special handling over and above what we've got at the moment.
Yeah, I just bring it up because I know that when you get into the menus, if you ever built pop-up menus by hand, you'll realize that it's not as easy as it seems.
No, it's a nightmare. Getting it right on TiddlyWiki Classic was a pain in the neck as well. I'm just curious to see how Bootstrap handles these things. If indeed it does. Where would they be? Drop downs, I guess, isn't it? Why don't... Because we need to go under JavaScript. None of these, of course, have submenus, but anyway, let's just see where they... See, I mean, Bootstrap does it my way. Here's the drop-down menu. It contains what for me would be a button and not an anchor tag, and then it contains the URL, which they've just CSS'd into the right place. It looks like so the drop-down open has a position relative. So it's not even the drop-down, it gets margin and padding. It doesn't actually have its position specified because it looks like the margin or the padding, one or the other, accounts for that guy. Oh no, it doesn't even need to do that. So yes, it's just being shown at the 0, position actually. But I must say, I did think that I'd seen submenus in Bootstrap.
Yeah, because once you get into the other considerations, like fold up on mouse out and keyboard navigation and stuff, it ends up being quite the task.
Yeah. So
it's like one of those things where it's like, well, should I do it right the first time or do it in a way that's I understand you're under a lot of work, but
well, so I mean, it looks like Bootstrap for submenus again. It's still using the same inline technique, as far as I can tell. So they will need to dig around, but they're clearly solving the overflow issue. If I do a bit of add a very long one of these.
Yeah, put a constraint on one of those. Put a width constraint. Yeah, there you go.
I think if we do a width, yeah, it is gonna. It hasn't got overflow set very sensibly. But
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, more investigation needed. But I think I think that boat may have already sailed, is my fear, because so those two issues of how we propagate messages from a menu that's somewhere else in the tree, plus how we duplicate the CSS of the source site. Those do seem quite problematic, actually. Interesting.
Yeah.
Let me investigate that further anyway, because it's not the kind of thing to do on the fly.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to mention was that I can't remember if this is an issue or not, but look into it. Is the Z indexing on those type of nested stuff? I'm hoping that you can specify it and it's going to work right, but I'm thinking that it may have caused problems before. I remember.
Yes, I mean I've got I do see they've got some Z indexes here, freaking things out. There's at the moment there's a few places where we use Z indexes kind of brutally, and yes, sort of aware that that might be making life difficult for other people. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, have you got a specific? Have you seen a specific problem there?
Well, there's some kind of new convention they're going by with Z indexes that doesn't quite be logical in your mind, be intuitive. You know, about how they decide priority and stuff like that. So I'm thinking that, you know, with other types of elements, or, you know, I'm just saying it's something to look out for, and whether it be, you know, when you go in there.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I'd rather not have any Z-index stuff going on at all. I wonder how we are doing. Yeah, I see. I mean, even in the boot kernel, we've got the password wrapper getting a.
Right. It's one of those things you have to do because everybody else is doing it. In other words, that you don't know what the user is going to be doing as far as, you know, stacking elements.
It's not too bad, actually. I've remembered now that the one that's dodgy is this, that I've got a Z index on the vertical tab buttons. I can't honestly remember why. But other than that, it's not too bad. They're on things like the modals, which you would expect to conceivably have a Z index, and the modal backdrop, you know, so we've got to get all that stuff right. The top bar, that's probably a bit messy. I might prefer it. Oh, but of course that has to, yeah, exactly as you just said, Mark. That's the contagiousness of Z-index.
Right.
But it is, that's just there because of the pop-up one, I think. Interesting. Well, I mean, I guess as I was indicating before, or in the list of things before the beta, the things I've really got to focus on now in the next couple of weeks are these few biggish items that are, you know, disruptive. So I think we mentioned the CSS class names, the submenus would be another one. That sidebars thing, reorganizing the way the sidebars work would be another. Okay, let me on the screen share. So I should trot off in a minute or two. Is there any other questions or comments before we close for today? Otherwise, we'll do the usual waving goodbye to everybody, and then the call will stay open for us for a few minutes. But before we say goodbye, I'd like to say again, thank you very much for your time and trouble in coming along. Acutely aware that you came along to a hangout and then saw Jeremy do the most inept piece of debugging imaginable, but hopefully you saw through that. And planning to have a hangout as usual next week on the 2nd of September. And look forward to seeing everybody on the groups in the meantime. So to those of you watching, thank you very much as well. And bye-bye from me, and let's all wave goodbye. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.